Good morning, everybody. Another wonderful day of building. Next up is the ab pad with the ab plates and crotch plate, or cod piece, if you will. We're going to be working on these two pieces today. The cod piece, obviously a very simple shape. Going to dome it a little more than we have anything else so far, but sealing up the edges is going to be something we can kind of hopefully fast forward through. The fun part is going to be the ab pad, the ab plate, because that has a lot of interesting angles and ridges in it. And as I mentioned in the other video, I think I got a pretty clever way to handle that. Hope the prop store of London doesn't mind me posting their picture. This is of a screen-used Cynthia Scott Dietrich plate. One decision you're going to need to make is on the actual cod piece, crotch plate. As you can see here, it is relatively smooth. Nowadays, Terry is doing a ridge down the middle in his current replicas, which give the piece a little more curvature and more strength. But as you can see from the Dietrich plate, it's not exactly screen accurate. I'm sure it is an improved design and will hold up much better to actual wear and tear. But that's the original way, was smooth, and it's not just an outlier here. Here you can see the Wierzbowski piece and the Hudson piece. This Hudson piece is from Harry Harris's website. You gotta check that out if you're a fan and you don't already know about it. So it's pretty much clear cut. The original screen accurate way is the smooth way, which is slightly smaller, and that's the pattern I've used. I'm not going to be using the wider reinforced pattern, so we're going to do it the old way for now. On to the hammering. So once again, we have got just way too much material around the basic shape that we want to work with. The more material that you got, the more you're going to have to cut off later. And really, as I said in the last video, there's really just not that much on the sides. A little bit does go a long way for creating strength. So we're going to trim this piece up after we roughed out the thing to get it out of the base metal. Even that may be too thick. But we're going to hammer that out. Tin snips, some of them are designed to go left or right. These are just ones that are straight. If you want to get ones designed to go left or right, it can be easier for sure. I've been fine with these old-fashioned over there. So now we've got our basic shape, a little lip, and we are going to start doming it. It's already pretty dished, you know, just from the natural shape of the sled, but we want it to be a little bit more, just a bit. So if you don't have anything to dome it with, honestly, it is dished enough. When I first did my first set, I just did it plain. I didn't do any additional dishing in my original set. This time I've got this, so I'm going to try to go the extra mile for it. But you really don't need to. It's okay as is if you want. Working the outside edges, working your way to the middle. The more to the edge you get, the more extreme the curvature is going to be. This is really more just subtle. You don't need it to actually hold anything. Well, you know what I mean. So you see already it is, I think, pretty clear that it's much more domed. Maybe even too much. Good with that. Now we're going to hammer down the edges. Alright, so going back to the little hammer and back to our regular end. I'm going to work, because there's not really any flat straight parts in this. Maybe you could argue these top spots. I'm going to use the slightly rounded side. Go ahead and do that. Alright, once again we are referencing the screen use prop just to give you a quick idea of what we're doing here. So we've got our rough shape. It is something to do the ridges. We are going to actually flip it around, make our marks, and hammer on the inside to pop those ridges out. So when we decide what we're doing, you got to make an imaginary line from the point to the point, and you know the inside lines are mostly in line with that. Same on the other side. So when we draw those lines, we're going to do the 3 across the middle, and then we're just going to do the 2 down here. This is, of course, slightly bowed because it goes around the human sternum, and not as pronounced on Dietrich's set, but more obvious on Wierzbowski's set, is that the bottom portions push out. So the top is bowed and round and dished, but the bottom kind of protrudes out, because you got to realize this is where the stress point's going to be around your waist, and you do need to bend forward. So odds are, if you don't make this protruding area, it's going to happen anyway. It's just going to dig into your hips or cut up your ab pad. On a related note, you will need 1-inch webbing, 1-inch Fastex buckles, 1 cam lock buckle for the bottom crotch plate, and one of these ab pads. That's later. We'll do all that when we get to strapping at the very end after painting. Very, very end. But if you want to get parts on order, again, the same guys. Spat Cave makes one. Chef's Creations makes one that's more accurate. And the best one you can get is actually from Noble. I'm not sure how many runs he has got planned on these coming up, if any at all. He's done several runs. You can find Noble on the Aliens Legacy forum. He makes the best ones. If you can't find one new, they're kicking around on the secondary market. Keep your eyes open. But in the meantime, like I said, let's worry about strapping up later. We're going to worry about hammering out our shapes. Here at the former again, this is another piece that is pretty dished. I mean, if you don't have the former, you can move right on into the sealing of the edges, and the next, you see I drew my pattern on the inside of where I want the ridges to be. But I'm going to just try to clean it up just a little bit. It's a bit uneven. I don't know if you can see it here, but I'm going to do that real quick. And then I'm going to hammer down all the edges on the top real quick. I'm going to save the bottom for after I put the ridges in, so that I can then tilt this up and then lock it into place when it's up. If I tilt it up and lock it then, it's going to be real tough to do the ridges. You'll see how that's going to work in just a second. Now we are finally going to do the ridges. Professional blacksmiths have a seaming tool. I don't know what it's called, but it's got a big wheel, and they basically turn the piece right through it, and it makes these edges that we're hammering down one hit at a time, it makes them clean. That's how you know a proper person's going to do it. Those tools, I believe, are several $1,000s, even for the hand crank ones, and there are, of course, motorized ones. They also can use those seaming tools not only to bend the edges nice and smooth with the crisp line, but to also put it in the middle of the piece and create a ridge with a nice smooth line. I have no doubt when you shell out the big bucks for a professional to do it, you will have the nice clean lines. We are going to improvise more than just a little bit here though. So, the method I have figured out for this is to actually use the vise as a positive side, and we are going to put our ridges into the negative. We're going to want our vise just we're going to want it, I'm going to call it 3/8 of an inch, and we are going to line up your lines with the gap dead center. Start where you can see, never just start blind in the middle and hope. So we can see the line coming through here on this corner, and we're going to use the wood chisel that we had talked about earlier, or stone chisel, whatever. You're going to want to make sure, extra sure, that you knock the corners off it. You want it slightly rounded. You don't need to make it completely round. I don't think it'll hurt if you do. And you want to make it more dull. We talked about this in the tool section. The last thing we want is to hammer this and have it puncture our piece and then have to start all over. Although honestly, if you do puncture the piece, you can hammer it pretty flat in the paint. Nobody's ever going to see it. But just for your own peace of mind, the last thing you want to do is puncture your aluminum. So we are going to put this right here on the spot we marked. You're going to want to line it up as center as possible. If you get off center, you may have a ridge that has the peak off to the side. That is not a terrible thing. Worse things could happen. I'm going to give it 2 or 3 good hits, and then you're going to move it on down the line. The hit that you made, if you can see that, will actually help keep it centered while you move it, because now you've got a notch to fit in that groove. So now you've got your starting point. You can work from it. Now I move it a little over. Don't move it all the way over, or you're going to see individual ones. You want them to overlap just a bit as you go on to the next one. Honestly, you could probably switch to a larger hammer at this point. It might make it a little easier. But again, you want to feel it out. You don't want to punch through, so you don't want to hit especially hard or hit with a crazy heavy hammer. And now what we've got is our first ridge. You can see that it is not perfectly centered. I did hit it so the right side is higher than the left. But again, once you paint it, once you get it all together, all people are going to see is your wonderfully sculpted straight ridge, and it stays pretty smooth as long as you overlap. I'd say I go knock in the first one, go about halfway down, knock in the second, go about halfway down, knock in the next one, so that you don't have any lines. It looks like one continuous ridge. So when you hammer all these out, it's gonna look good. I mean, I think it's gonna look great. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the rest of those here, and then we're gonna tackle the bottom. Alright, so we got our ridges. I'm pretty pleased with them. I think they look pretty good. Now we've got to angle up. Now these ridges have actually created a lot of strength. It's going to make it a little bit tough to angle it up. But like I mentioned before, if we had done it angled first, we wouldn't have been able to get it flat. It would have been stuck out and we would never have gotten the ridges. We'd have had to hammer it flat again. So now we are just going to do our best to tilt the edges. We are going to use the soft hammer just to try to impact it up. I don't want to use the hard hammer because I don't want to destroy the things I just made. I say I'm trying to get a subtle rise. I'm not really trying to blow the whole shape up. So you see, it's starting to come. I mean, depending on how big you are, you may not even be too worried about that. Okay, the reference photo of where's Baskey's plate, Ski was a big dude. So we're gonna chip away at that. I'm just gonna get a subtle one. I'm a big dude. So. So see, we're not destroying our lines entirely. At all, really. Actually, pretty pleased with the arc and how little damage to our ridges we did with them being already there. So then I'm going to seal these edges down and that'll be nice. We call that one done. ready for drilling and mounting. We got our ab and crotch plates done. All we need is our ab pad, and we can rivet them down, and we're ready to roll. So tomorrow, I believe, or later today, if I have time, we'll, I guess we're going to start the shoulder bells, because there should be, again, not an overly complicated shape, but something that'll has a fun little wrinkle in the divots that they have, and something larger. Starting to move on to our larger pieces at this point. So have a good one.